Good evening, and welcome to the hidden history of the Rothschild family, where in the Royal Exchange and smoky coffee houses of Regency London, 1815, one tired courier arriving a few hours early could move the price of British debt before the government had finished breakfast, amid candle wax, printer's ink, crackling bond paper, marble echoes, and the slow murmur of rumor. Welcome back, Bryn in Cardiff and Hannah in Nova Scotia, who both commented on the last video and stayed until the end, and I am very glad you are here again. Tell me where you are and what time it is for you, just like Bryn and Hannah did. And if you feel like it, please like and subscribe so you can fall asleep here each episode. Have you ever heard a story so neat and satisfying that it seemed true long before anyone checked it? Tonight that story is already waiting. The air holds damp wool, candle grease, fresh ink, and the faint bitter smell of coffee cooling beside a stack of folded papers. In the reading room, you are already lifting another letter toward the firelight, trying to see what Nathan Rothschild really did when Napoleon fell, and why the truth may be stranger, funnier, and rather less tidy than the legend. The famous version begins in a way that almost dares memory to keep it forever. Nathan Rothschild receives the news of Waterloo before anyone else in London. He learns that Napoleon is beaten. He understands at once what this means for markets, for government bonds, and for anyone quick enough to act before the city catches up. He does not cheer, he does not rush about, he does something much better for legend. He goes to the Royal Exchange, he takes his place by his usual marble column, he wears the same unreadable face that seems, in every retelling, to have been carved by a very private mason. Around him, the market watches, the brokers know his habits, they know his money, they know that if Nathan Rothschild is buying, someone else should probably stop chatting and start thinking. But on this morning, the story says he begins to sell. Not a great theatrical selling, not a dramatic arm-waving show, something quieter, and therefore much more effective. He lets paper go. He lets enough paper go for others to notice. He lets the room make its own frightened little guesses. The guesses arrive right on time. If Nathan is selling, then perhaps the news from the continent is bad. If the news is bad, then perhaps Wellington has failed. If Wellington has failed, then perhaps Britain is in trouble. If Britain is in trouble, then perhaps these handsome government bonds are suddenly less handsome than they looked over breakfast. And so the panic starts, gently at first. A few men sell because Nathan seems to sell. A few more men sell because the first few men have sold. By the time the rumor reaches a third person, Higginbotham is generally assumed to have improved it. Prices slide, faces lengthen, gloves tighten around paper, consoles, those long paper promises from the British state, lose their shine. Nathan remains at the column. He does not explain himself. He does not confirm anything. He simply stands there and lets the room do what rooms like that always do. Then comes the clever part that made the legend immortal. While everyone else is throwing bonds overboard, Nathan's agents quietly buy them back at the lower price. They buy and buy while the market trembles. They collect huge amounts of British debt for a fraction of what it will be worth as soon as the truth becomes public. Official news finally arrives. Britain has won. Napoleon is done. The market rebounds. Prices leap. Nathan Rothschild makes a fortune so enormous that the rest of his life becomes, in some tellings, a mere victory lap, with better tailoring. That is the tale as people love to tell it. Sometimes a pigeon brings the news. Sometimes a private boat lands through rough weather. Sometimes an exhausted courier gallops into the city with salt on his coat and very little patience left. Henry in spirit has not slept since 1812. The details change a little, the shape never does. One man learns the truth first, one man keeps his nerve. One room full of slower, richer, duller people misses the signal. The outsider outplays the establishment in their own marble hall, and by noon he has bent history into a profitable shape. It is a perfect story for books. It is a perfect story for documentaries with anxious music. It is a perfect story for websites that enjoy the words secret, fortune, and Waterloo on the same page. It is also perfect for those long online posts that begin with an air of revelation and end with everyone nodding wisely. It survives because it feels complete. The hero is clear, the stage is handsome, the trick is easy to explain, the profit is large enough to dazzle, but simple enough to picture as a heap. Most of all, the story gives finance a face. Markets are usually made of fog, paper guesses, and very boring arithmetic. This legend turns all that into one man at one column on one morning. It is generous like that. It also gives rumor excellent lighting. The Royal Exchange is one of those places that already sounds like a story, even before anyone has lied in it. Marble columns do a lot of work for a legend. So do polished shoes, damp cloaks, and little folded notes passed hand to hand. And Nathan Rothschild suits the role almost too well. He was real enough, of course. He was not invented by a novelist with a taste for heavy drapery. Yet his public manner offered exactly what myth likes best. He was compact and controlled. He was wealthy. He was famously hard to read. He stood at the same spot so regularly that the spot itself became part of his public identity. In time, he becomes more than a man in the story. He becomes the column. That is not only because he leaned at one, it is because people treated him like load-bearing infrastructure for European finance. If he looked calm, the ceiling stayed up. If he looked thoughtful, the whole room adjusted its collar. One can see why this turned into legend. There are men who become famous because they speak beautifully. There are men who become famous because they fight duels, wear lovely coats, or marry noisily. Nathan became famous in part because nobody could tell what he was thinking, which is catnip to every age. A silent rich man is like an empty stage with the curtains half open. He also fits another deep wish that listeners bring to the tale. The wish is not noble, but it is very human. People enjoy hearing about a person who stands outside the old club and beats it anyway. They enjoy the thought of old institutions moving heavily while one quicker mind slips around them. It is the same pleasure as watching a slow carriage overtaken by a smaller, mud-splashed rider who somehow knows a shortcut. Nathan was a banker, not a fairy godmother. Still, in the polished form of the story, he has that fairy tale outline. He is the clever outsider who sees what the great and proper people do not. He wins not by birth, but by speed, nerve, and information. That combination has sold extremely well for 2 centuries. It sells to those who admire him. It also sells to those who distrust him. A very efficient legend can serve opposite moods without changing its coat. If someone likes brilliance, the story offers brilliance. If someone suspects hidden power, the story offers hidden power. If someone simply wants a neat anecdote at dinner, the story arrives carrying its own dessert spoon. And so it is repeated. It appears in memoirs, in hostile pamphlets, in friendly family histories, in newspaper scraps, in chatty retellings, and later in television scripts that cannot resist a dim corridor and a closing hoofbeat. Each version smooths it a little more. The rough bits vanish first. The market terms are shortened. The names are trimmed. The slow, lumpy business of moving money through Europe is brushed away. What remains is the polished coin of the tale itself, warm from many hands. In some versions, Nathan almost single-handedly buys Britain. In others, he gains control of the Bank of England by lunchtime, which would have been a very busy morning even for him. Some say he manipulates the entire market with one expression. Some give him a pigeon, as if the man were running a private weather service. People repeat these things with great confidence. Confidence helps. So does the setting. Regency London was made for this kind of retelling. Imagine the streets outside. They are muddy, crowded, noisy, and full of traffic that never quite agrees on whose wheel should go first. Coach doors open and close. Boys shout newspapers. Porters carry trunks. Horses steam in the damp air. Then imagine stepping inside. The Royal Exchange cools the day at once. The stone gives back every footstep. Voices rise and flatten against the marble. Men in dark coats cluster and split like schools of fish that have somehow learned bookkeeping. Paper is everywhere. Paper folded into pockets. Paper tucked inside gloves. Paper tied with string. Paper bearing sums large enough to feed villages. Written in a hand so thin it seems embarrassed by its own importance. The papers make their own sound. They click and rasp and crinkle. They are straightened on sleeve cuffs. They are tapped into order against a palm. They are passed between gloved hands with the solemnity of communion and the speed of a card trick. Around the exchange wait the coffee houses. These are not gentle places for a quiet pastry and an agreeable nap. They are busy rooms of steam, argument, ink, and impatience. Coffee is poured dark and bitter. Sugar is chipped from hard loaves. Newspapers hang on rods for many eyes at once. A man may enter there with one opinion and leave with 6. He may also leave with a bill, a stain on his cuff, and 3 rumors he now mistakes for personal knowledge. Mr. Higginbotham thrives in this climate like a cheerful fungus. News travels oddly in such rooms. It moves by letter, by packet boat, by horse, by clerk, by whispered aside, and by the very old system of one anxious man telling another anxious man that he knows something. Accuracy is not always invited. This matters for the Waterloo legend. The tale depends on speed. It depends on one private network running ahead of the government itself. It depends on a family of bankers having better information than ministers, generals, and official messengers. That sounds dramatic because it was dramatic. It also sounds faintly impossible, which only improves the flavor. A story becomes stronger when it balances right on the edge between clever and outrageous. Too ordinary, and nobody repeats it. Too absurd, and even Mr. Higginbotham puts his teacup down. So the legend gives Nathan a network. The network is made of brothers, clerks, agents, relay riders, boats, coded letters, and the sort of determination that makes sleep seem like a rumor. It stretches across Europe like string pulled between busy fingers. This part, unlike the rest, does not need much embroidery. The Rothschilds really did build a remarkable system for moving news, money, and instructions. They used every practical means they could find. If 19th century DHL had a pigeon division, rode on horseback, and served one very well-dressed client, it would begin to resemble the thing. Henry belongs here, at least in spirit. He is the overworked courier of the imagination, wet from a channel crossing, cold in the hands, and still somehow ahead of everyone else's official dispatch. If he ever sat down, history has neglected to record it. The legend loves him because speed needs a body. It is one thing to say information arrived early. It is better to picture boots on wet stone, a sealed packet, a horse that would prefer retirement, and a man who has eaten cheese in the saddle again. Once the packet arrives, the stage narrows. All roads lead back to the exchange. All eyes drift toward Nathan at his pillar. He is both actor and scenery now. There is something almost comic in how fixed he becomes. Every morning, there he is, the same place, the same measured posture, the same face giving out no more than a locked desk drawer. He was, in a sense, the original cryptic market post. He stood there like a human message that everybody screenshotted in their mind, though nobody could agree on what it meant. By the time the meaning had passed through several listeners, it bore the usual marks of public improvement. That is one reason the story survives. It is not just about money. It is about reading a room. It is about trying to interpret silence. It is about that universal fear that everyone else has noticed the important thing before you have. Most people know that feeling. You enter a conversation late. Everyone else seems to understand the joke or the problem or the plan. You smile and nod while your brain hurries to put the furniture in place. The Waterloo legend turns that feeling into financial theater. The brokers become ordinary in a very comforting way. They are not evil geniuses. They are simply people trying not to be the last to grasp a change in the weather. They look at Nathan because someone must know something, and he looks very much like a someone. The beautiful part is that the story requires almost no technical knowledge. A listener does not need to understand discount rates, settlement dates, or bond yields. He only needs to understand that bad news makes people sell, good news makes prices rise, and the first person with the truth has the best seat. That simplicity is powerful. It lets the tale cross from specialist circles into popular memory. It can be told by bankers over ledgers, by grandfathers over supper, by novelists who enjoy a sinister pause, and by strangers online who have read half a paragraph and are now very certain a good myth travels light. This one carries 3 images and little else. The fast courier, the unreadable man at the column, the huge profit made while everyone else panicked. Those images fit together so neatly that they seem older than they are. Many listeners meet the story as if it had always existed, like a nursery rhyme or a proverb about weather. They do not remember where they first heard it. They only remember that it sounded finished. And finished stories are hard to resist. Real history is usually lumpy. It arrives in bundles. Dates disagree, letters go missing, people misremember, clerks blot ink across the one line you need. A legend, by contrast, arrives already pressed, folded, and tied with ribbon. In the reading room, that ribbon is part of the problem. The desk before you is warm near the lamp and cool at the edges. There is a faint line of dust on the window frame. A saucer bears a T-ring shaped like a small, pale moon. The documents are less elegant than the story. Some are copies made later. Some are letters full of practical matters that stubbornly refuse to sound legendary. Some mention rates, shipments, names, and delays with all the glamour of household accounts. Yet even here the myth glows. One can feel it in the margins of later retellings. One can hear it in the way biographers linger over the column, as if the marble itself were secretly directing the plot. One can sense it whenever a writer reaches Waterloo and starts polishing. There is also the pleasure of scale. People love stories in which a single morning alters a life. They love the thought of one decision, one signal, one cool face in a crowded room, setting millions into motion. It offers the comfort of clarity. History rarely grants such clarity, but legends are generous with it. They take the wide, muddy field of human events and cut a tidy path through the middle. Here, they say, is the turning point. Here is the clever man. Here is the exact moment when everyone else was fooled. It feels very satisfying. It also feels efficient. The 19th century was full of slow things. Coaches were slow. Letters were slow. Official channels were often slow in the particular, maddening way that only official channels can manage. The Waterloo tale reverses that slowness. It says private skill beat public delay. It says nimble information outran ceremony. It says the real power sat not in a ministry but by a column among brokers. This is thrilling in a muted, account book sort of way. No sword is needed, no speech is needed, only a sealed message, a room of nervous men, and enough money to turn restraint into a weapon. Even the props are memorable. Think of Nathan's gloves. Think of the folded bond certificates. Think of the chalk on the board, the smear of rain on a coat sleeve, the quick private glance between clerks. Finance becomes physical. It acquires texture. That helps the story stay alive. It is easier to remember a damp courier than an interest rate. It is easier to picture a marble column than a balance sheet. It is easier to repeat a glance than a table of prices. The tale also flatters the listener. To hear it is to feel, for a pleasant moment, that one has slipped behind the curtain. One is no longer with the slow official crowd. One is now in possession of the hidden mechanism. People enjoy hidden mechanisms. They especially enjoy them when the mechanism is simple enough to retell at once. Secret networks are alluring. Secret networks explained in 3 minutes are nearly irresistible. That is why Waterloo never quite leaves Nathan alone. He did many things in business. He worked within an immense family system. He dealt in bullion, loans, bills, and government finance with a persistence that would make most modern inboxes whimper. Yet Waterloo floats above it all like a stage lantern. Once attached to a name, such a lantern shines for generations. Each new age rewrites the edges to suit itself. The Victorians made the tale moral and grand. Later writers made it cunning and dark. Modern versions often make it algorithmic before algorithms had the courtesy to be invented. Still, the core remains untouched. Early news, false selling, hidden buying, enormous gain. It fits the mind like a familiar key. Even objections, when people bother with them, often strengthen the legend. If one doubts the pigeon, another offers a fast boat. If one doubts the exact trade, another insists on secret agents in the crowd. The tale sheds one detail and grows another, like a hedge being trimmed into slightly different animals. That is the special sturdiness of money myths. They can absorb corrections without surrendering their shape. They feed on uncertainty, because uncertainty is what they were made from in the first place. A rumor about markets behaves very much like a market. By the time it reaches print, it feels official. Print gives confidence to all sorts of things. A sentence in type looks as if it has washed its face and put on a respectable coat. Readers are often kind enough to stop asking where it came from. This was helpful to the Waterloo story. Long after 1815, writers found it ready to hand. It could be sharpened for drama, darkened for suspicion, or brightened into admiration. In 1846, one famous version arrived from a pamphlet writer using the pen name Satan, which raises several questions about editorial judgment, and none of them improved the footnotes. Yet even that did not slow the tale. If anything, It proved how durable the thing had become. A story that can thrive after being handed around by a man calling himself Satan has achieved a certain social confidence. Still, for now, the legend sits before us in its best coat. Nathan hears first. Nathan says nothing. Nathan lets the market frighten itself. Nathan quietly gathers up what others throw away. The official news arrives too late to matter, except as the final curtain. One can see why listeners settle into it so easily. The rhythms are comforting. The moves are crisp. Even the villainy, when some versions add a little, is neat and polished like something stored in a velvet case. Most of all, the tale promises that there is always someone who truly knows. That promise can be soothing. Markets are confusing. Governments are distant. Battle news, debt prices, and European politics make a tangled heap. It is calming to believe that one sharp man already saw the pattern, and that man in our story is always standing exactly where expected. The column waits in his place. He does not blink much. He does not explain. Around him, London's financial heart beats through paper and rumor. At his feet, the whole century seems to gather itself into anecdote. Here is the family name that still catches attention. Here is the private courier network that sounds half business, half fable. Here is the city, smoky and damp, pretending that information can never stay still once money begins listening. You can almost hear the tale rehearsing itself. A coffeehouse tells it one way, a memoir tells it another, a later historian smooths the roughness. An online summary strips out all remaining dust and serves it with great assurance. By then, the legend hardly needs Nathan at all. It could run on silhouette. It could run on mood. It could run on the irresistible idea that somewhere, amid all this public noise, one private intelligence quietly knew better. That is what has carried it so far. It is not merely a story about profit. It is a story about seeing through fog. It is a story about speed defeating ceremony. It is a story that lets modern listeners feel clever for recognizing an old pattern. And yet the reading room keeps asking its small, impolite question. Not whether the story is famous. It plainly is. Not whether the story is memorable. It certainly is. Only what, among all this paper and smoke and murmured certainty, Nathan Rothschild actually did. In the warm reading room, the map of Europe lies open under a small pool of lamplight. You rest one finger on London, then Paris, then Frankfurt, Vienna, and Naples. The 5 cities make a neat family shape across the paper. The room smells faintly of dust, wool, and old paste from repaired bindings. Somewhere beyond the door, a clerk turns a page with the care of a nurse. It is a pleasant place to piece together a large myth. It is also a good place to notice how often large myths begin with postage. The Rothschild network did not look magical at close range. It looked expensive, organized, and full of men who badly needed dry socks. Each house had clerks, ledgers, codes, and a daily appetite for news. Each house also had brothers who disliked waiting for governments to wake up. A letter might begin in Frankfurt before dawn on very thin paper. It would be folded hard, sealed tight, and passed at once to a writer. Thin paper mattered because ounces mattered. So did neat folds, clear addresses, and wax that stayed put in rain. A great deal of history turns out to depend on sealing wax. This is mildly disappointing, though very soothing. The family houses acted like relay points in one long private road. News moved from office to office, never really coming to rest. A rider carried a packet to the next post town. Another horse waited there, steaming faintly in the yard. Stable boys knew the sound of urgent wheels at odd hours. They knew how to tighten a girth by lantern light without much conversation. An inn-yard was part office, part stable, and part damp theater. Buckets knocked against stone, harness creaked, and someone always wanted bread. The family paid for speed in the plainest possible way. They paid more than other people, and then they paid again. They kept more than one messenger available at need. They sent duplicates by separate roads when the matter felt especially delicate. This was not romance, though later writers tried very hard to improve it. It was management, cash, and a dislike of delay. From the reading room, you can almost hear the scratch of copied letters. Clerks entered times of departure, arrival, and receipt with stern little strokes. Those times mattered because the whole machine depended on comparison. A difference of 3 hours could mean profit, reassurance, or simple superiority. European governments had post roads, couriers, and official channels of their own. The family network simply used the same continent with fewer speeches. It helped that the brothers were stationed where trade already converged. Frankfurt linked German lands, Paris watched France, Vienna listened eastward, Naples faced the south, and London swallowed everything. Each branch knew which banker to trust and which innkeeper answered at midnight. Each branch also knew which customs officer preferred politeness wrapped around a discreet fee. A private courier system sounds grand when written in a memoir. In practice, it often looked like mud on boots and oats in a nosebag. The riders themselves lived inside weather. Their faces met mist, sleet, dust, road grit, and the private opinions of many horses. One imagines Henry among them, because Henry always appears when a timetable becomes absurd. He is perpetually damp, faintly cross, and somehow already on the next road. Henry is less a man than a condition of service. He seems not to have slept properly since 1812. He would leave one house with a leather packet under his coat. He would arrive at another with salt on his cuffs and ink on his thumb. The packet might contain exchange rates, bond prices, trade gossip, family instructions, or political hints. Most of history, even at speed, remained gloriously clerical. A battle report in such a packet would travel beside matters of credit and grain. Someone still needed to ask after silver shipments and overdue bills. That is one useful correction to the legend. The network was built for business every day, not for one dramatic afternoon. Its routine strength made its famous moments possible. A system cannot become suddenly swift unless it is practiced being swift while carrying boring things. In London, the results emerged in places with marble floors and tired candles. At the Royal Exchange, rumor moved like warm air through a stairwell. Government bond certificates crackled in gloved hands like very serious sweet wrappers. Printer's ink and candle wax made their own dependable perfume. Under the great roof, brokers raised and lowered their voices in a steady weather. Beneath them all ran the soft, unstoppable murmur of maybe. Nathan Rothschild appeared there each morning at his usual pillar. By habit and by function, everyone called him the column. He leaned in the same place with such regularity that the building seemed designed around him. He neither confirmed nor denied anything, ever. This was the original version of posting to fintech Twitter. It was cryptic, unverifiable, and mentally screenshotted by everyone within earshot. Of course, the exchange was only the last room in the chain. Before a whisper reached the column, it had crossed roads, borders, inns, and kitchens. Packets moved westward from the continent in overlapping lines. Paris could feed London, Frankfurt could feed Paris, and Vienna might feed both after some delay. Sometimes the brothers wrote in cipher for private matters. Sometimes they used nicknames, abbreviations, or family terms that saved space and puzzled outsiders. Cross-writing also appeared because paper was dear and margins were tempting. A page could look like a hedge if money felt tight enough. The clerks who copied these letters were not living inside a legend. They were living inside very long mornings. They sharpened quills, warmed wax, sanded wet lines, and kept blotting paper close. They folded each note with the fussy care of people who knew roads were rude. Many dispatches were short because speed disliked essays. A useful letter named a fact, a time, and what to do next. That habit gave the network its snap. It also disappoints anyone hoping for capes, secret lamps, and orchestral pigeons. Still, one part of the route truly was difficult. Europe could be crossed on horseback, but the channel remained stubbornly wet. You can feel the shift in every record once the road reaches the coast. Ink grows hurried, names of ports multiply, and everyone starts consulting wind. At Dover, Deal, Margate, Calais, or Ostend, the great machine had to stop and bargain with water. Horses were very good at roads, and notably poor at becoming boats. The channel crossing was the bottleneck that kept legends alive. If one man beat the official messenger here, the whole story afterwards felt enchanted. On the shore, enchantment looked like rope, tar, gull cries, and wet planks. It smelled of seaweed, pitch, and yesterday's fish. A courier might arrive after riding all night from Brussels or Paris. He would find tide tables, sleepy boatmen, and a horizon with opinions. Packet boats sailed on schedules when weather allowed. Fishing craft could be hired when schedules proved too dignified for urgent finance. A fast crossing depended on money, nerve, and knowing whom to wake. It also depended on whether the wind chose to cooperate before breakfast. This is less romantic than the paintings suggest. Most urgency at a harbor involves waiting in a bad coat. Henri naturally waits in a bad coat more than anyone. His tailcoat never really dries between one crossing and the next. One can picture him on a Kent quay at dawn. His boots squeak, his gloves are salted stiff, and his expression rejects poetry. If the regular packet could not leave at once, a smaller vessel might. Merchants hired cutters, fishing smacks, and anything else with a mast and a willing owner. Owners became especially willing when paid in hard coin. Speed has always improved when money arrives before argument. The family did not trust a single route if two were possible. A key dispatch might leave by Calais and also by Ostend, just in case. That kind of redundancy feels modern in a very irritating way. It was 19th century DHL, if DHL had a pigeon division and one exquisitely dressed customer. Yet the sea still imposed its quiet rules. Fog erased confidence, rough water delayed departures, and contrary winds made everyone equally humble. A messenger could reach the coast with brilliant speed and then lose hours to weather. He could also gain hours if a boat happened to stand ready. So the network's success came partly from preparation at the edge. Agents knew where to send packets, whom to alert, and which captain enjoyed a profitable surprise. On arrival in England, speed still depended on the next horse. Dover to London was a road, but roads also had moods. Fresh teams, post chases, and coach horses could be arranged quickly if one paid enough. The family usually did, because stale news was nearly the same as no news. In practice, the famous leap over the channel was often several smaller acts. One man rode, another crossed, another drove, and a clerk in London opened the seal. A myth prefers one hero and one horse. A real courier system prefers spare men, spare mounts, and spare copies. The reading room has several letters that smell faintly of old damp. Their folds still remember sea air better than their writers do. Margins mention tides, packet delays, and late arrivals with weary economy. Nobody sounds heroic, though several sound annoyed. That annoyance is one of the best signs of truth. Real speed is full of people complaining that it ought to have been quicker. From there it is only a small step to pigeons, because the human mind cannot resist improving a wet crossing with a bird. A boat is fine, but a pigeon glides much better in a story. The pigeon version of events is wonderfully tidy. A tiny creature lifts from the battlefield, or perhaps from the coast, and carries destiny to London in a neat little tube. It is a lovely picture for children's books and suspicious uncles. It is less satisfying once you open the footnotes. Carrier pigeons certainly existed, and financiers knew their uses, could carry short notes home very fast under the right conditions. But birds are not little winged paragraphs. They are excellent at returning to a home loft, and much less interested in historical drama. That detail matters more than most legends allow. A pigeon must be trained to fly one way, back to where it lives. So if someone claims a bird flew effortlessly in every direction, the bird deserves an editor. Pigeons, unlike pamphleteers, cannot improvise geography. A useful pigeon message was tiny. It might give a price, a name, a time, or one sharp piece of news. It could be written on fine paper and wrapped with great care. Someone still had to catch the bird, read the note, and trust the handwriting. Lofts also needed feeding, cleaning, and patient routine. Grain bins and wicker baskets belong to this story more than thunderclouds do. There is evidence that pigeons were used in financial communication in this era. There is much less evidence for the most theatrical Waterloo pigeon of popular memory. Some later accounts treat the bird as if it personally managed European capital. This asks a lot of an animal that mostly wanted seed and familiar rafters. The sources grow hazy exactly where the drama thickens. That is usually the moment when George Matthew Dernevale, also called Satan, wanders in holding a pamphlet. He published his famous version in 1846 under the name Satan. This remains a bold choice in branding and a poor one in source criticism. In modern terms, it was a viral thread from an anonymous account named Satan. People shared it anyway, which is almost soothingly familiar. His tale helped fix the image of Nathan receiving Waterloo news by special means. Sometimes the special means became a courier, and sometimes a pigeon obligingly appeared. Once the bird enters, a story becomes almost too graceful. Real networks are rarely graceful, because they are busy finding oats, boatmen, and receipts. The likely truth is duller and therefore sturdier. Pigeons may have had occasional roles, but the heavy lifting belonged to men, horses, and scheduled desperation. A long battle report would not suit a bird very well. A brief signal might, if lofts and routes had been arranged beforehand. Even then, a pigeon gave only a sliver of the needed picture. Markets still wanted confirmation, timing, and a sense of what else had changed. That is why private couriers remained so valuable. They carried bundles, not hints, and they could answer questions when they arrived. A rider could bring several letters from different hands. He could also carry the mood of Paris in his face, which birds notoriously refuse to do. The legend keeps the pigeon because the pigeon is neat. The actual network keeps Henry because Henry can hold 6 packets, argue with boatmen, and look damply convincing. Back in the reading room, the evidence settles into a calmer shape. There are account books, correspondence, and timings, but very few obedient miracle birds. You begin to suspect that pigeons did what pigeons usually do in history. They contributed a little, and then received most of the applause. That brings the papers back to the larger question of speed. How did this family network compare with the British government's own dispatches? The answer is awkward for the government and excellent for the family legend. The private system could often be faster, though not because it owned wizardry. Official dispatches had duties beyond arrival. They needed proper channels, recognized messengers, receipts, and the dignity of being official. A government messenger might wait for certified copies and formal endorsements. A banker was happy with the first useful report that reached the desk. Governments also served many masters in many offices. A private house served its own interest with delicious concentration. If one branch heard something important, it did not need to brief 3 committees. It needed to inform a brother before the next market opened. That difference in appetite mattered enormously. Bureaucracy likes completeness, while finance often likes a respectable head start. Official systems could also become trapped by habit. Packets moved by established routes, at established times, under established authority. The Rothschild network used established routes too, but with much more improvisation at the edges. If a usual crossing stalled, another could be tried at once. The family paid local agents to stay alert in several ports. Those agents knew which road was passable, which captain was sober enough, and which horse had not yet worked that day. Governments had horses and boats, certainly. They also had procedures, which are slower than horses and heavier than boats. None of this means officials were idle or foolish. It means they were busy being official, while bankers were busy being first. A private courier could ride through the night because someone demanded it and paid. A state messenger might still ride quickly, but he carried the weight of protocol in his saddlebags. This helps explain the enduring Waterloo story, without making it true in every detail. Nathan may have received news very quickly because his network was built for unpleasantly quick receipt. He did not need a supernatural pigeon and a cloak lined with secrets. He needed offices, capital, relays, and men willing to travel while damp. The distinction matters because boring superiority is still superiority. A well-run system often looks magical to people using a slower one. In London, that difference became visible in hours rather than weeks. Hours are a dangerous size for rumors because they feel both tiny and enormous. A few hours early at the Royal Exchange could make men stare at one another strangely. It could also feed Mr. Higginbotham for days. Mr. Higginbotham never appears in ledgers, but he appears in spirit everywhere. If a rumor reaches a third person, he has almost certainly improved it. He hears that a courier landed before dawn. By breakfast, he knows the courier wrestled the tide, bribed Neptune, and changed horses on the moon. By luncheon, a pigeon has joined the matter out of pure convenience. By tea, the pigeon is bilingual in carrying government bonds. The brokers in the coffee houses drink this all in with their cups. Smoke hangs low, spoons click, and newspapers arrive still smelling of ink. In such rooms, facts and guesses share a bench very politely. One man notes a price, another notes a glance, and a third notes everything loudly. Nathan, meanwhile, continues his work at the column with maddening calm. He stands where he always stands and says less than everyone hopes. Silence is useful if the room is determined to interpret it. He knew that, or at least used it very comfortably. The network behind him allowed that silence to carry weight. If a man is thought well-informed, his shrug gains a market value. This is another plain correction to the later myth. Information was powerful, but so was the theater of appearing to possess it. A courier arriving first is one thing. A room of brokers deciding what that means is quite another. The Royal Exchange supplied the perfect stage for that second part. Marble gave back the low thunder of voices until rumor sounded almost architectural. Under the great dome, paper passed from glove to glove with a dry, papery sigh. Wax seals cracked, names were checked, and everyone tried not to look too eager. You can imagine one sealed note reaching a desk while candles gutter in the morning haze. Outside, wheels hiss on damp streets, and boys shout the latest print. Inside, a clerk opens the letter with a knife kept sharp for exactly this pleasure. He reads, copies, sends, and time begins turning into price. That turning is what the courier system really bought. Not certainty and not omniscience, but the right to act a little earlier than arrival. A little earlier was enough in bond markets. It usually still is, though the coats are worse and the screens are brighter. So, the family's network deserves admiration of a dry, clerical kind. It was a machine built from offices, trust, stamina, and relentless postage. It stretched across Europe because the family itself stretched across Europe. A brother in each city gave speed a place to arrive. There were no glowing lines on a map, of course. There were only roads, ledgers, inns, crossings, and men who knew where the next horse waited. That knowledge was practical rather than mysterious. It came from repetition, from payment, and from never assuming someone else would handle the awkward part. The awkward part was often the channel. After that, it was usually London traffic, which is always considered urgency a personal insult. Henri would know this better than any of us. He reaches the city soaked, exhausted, and just in time to be sent elsewhere. His coat leaves a faint, damp crescent on a chair in some outer office. Before it can dry, a clerk asks whether he can continue north by evening. He can, because people like Henri always can in these stories. History is full of overworked men whose reward for speed is another road. Still, one should not mistake endurance for myth. The system worked because ordinary tasks were done unusually well, over and over again. Letters were folded tightly, horses were ready, boats were found, copies were made, times were recorded. The family did not master Europe by dramatic flourish. It mastered delay by treating delay as a solvable household nuisance. That is perhaps the strangest part of all. The great money myth of the 19th century rests, when unwrapped, on logistics. A road here, a clerk there, a boat at the right hour, and a brother waiting at the other end. Nothing glows, and yet everything moves. From your chair in the warm reading room, the whole arrangement becomes almost domestic. Europe feels less like a battlefield and more like a house with very long corridors. At one end, a groom holds a horse by the bridle in mist. At the other, the column waits by his pillar, while Mr. Higginbotham vibrates with theory. Between them lies the truth about speed in 1815. It is not magic, though it gave magic plenty to wear. It is a chain of small, competent acts. It is a wet coat, a fast horse, a sealed note, and someone already watching the tide. And somewhere in that chain, poor Henri is boarding another boat. He is damp, ahead of the government again, and still not getting enough sleep. The papers rustle softly in the warm reading room, and your fingers gather a little gray dust. Candle wax and old leather hold the air still. A clerk long gone has left neat numbers in brown ink, and the whole great Waterloo myth begins to shrink. Outside these papers, London still hums in June. The Royal Exchange keeps its marble cool under many shoes. Coffee houses breathe out steam, damp wool, and printer's ink, while rumors move under every word like a second conversation. The story usually begins with a dash and a gasp. It likes one man, one secret, and one perfect trick. The archive, being stubborn and a little dull, begins instead with horses, packets, tide tables, and tired men trying not to drop official papers. On Sunday evening, the 18th of June, the field near Waterloo finally grew quiet enough for writing. Wellington had to turn noise into sentences. Somewhere by candlelight, with mud on boots and powder on sleeves, he made the neat official version the government required. That dispatch was not a magic object. It was folded paper, sealed, carried, and delayed by ordinary weather. History often rests on wax and string, which feels less grand than legend would prefer. Henry Percy had the plain burden of taking it home, and trusted. He also carried captured French Eagle standards, which made the whole errand feel rather over-decorated for a courier's work. You can picture the case against his side. The leather would have gone warm where his arm pressed it. Every buckle mattered, because wet roads and rough crossings were very good at shaking sense out of men and papers alike. The road north and west from the battlefield was no smooth royal ribbon. Horses had to be found and changed, post boys had to be woken, inns had to produce lanterns, oats, and that thin coffee, which is mostly hope in a cup. Through the night and into the 19th, the dispatch moved in stages. Wheels broke, hooves slipped, bridges bottlenecked. Every mile depended on some sleepy local arrangement, which is less dramatic than destiny and much more usual. Percy was fast, in the way fast used to mean. He did not float above Europe on wings of certainty. He bumped over it with relay horses and sore knees, while clerks in London slept under the impression that Monday would be another ordinary day. By the time the papers and trophies reached the Channel coast, the sea had begun its own small negotiations. Boats waited on wind and tide. Sailors frowned at the water. The 19th century could be brilliant with finance, and still very obedient to weather. This is where legend likes to cheat. It likes a straight line from battlefield to London whisper. The real line wobbles at the shore, gets damp, and asks after the packet. Henry the courier, in the Rothschild version of these matters, would already be soaked and somehow still ahead. Percy's crossing was the slow part, because the sea always reserves the right to be difficult. A rider could urge a horse. He could not persuade a headwind. Government urgency and salt water were poor companions on the very best day. So official news did not leap into London on the 19th. It worked its way there. It lost hours in the usual places. Those hours matter because myths thrive in gaps, and markets are very willing to fill a gap with imagination. In London, on Tuesday the 20th, people were not waiting in noble silence. They were doing what people always do around uncertain news. They were half working and half listening, with one ear for business and the other for footsteps in the passage. The coffee houses near the exchange were already thick with talk. Cups clicked in saucers. A boy folded damp newspapers on the counter. Someone by the window kept saying that a friend from Dover knew a man from Ostend, which is how history acquires feathers. Mr. Higginbotham was there in spirit, even if no document ever catches him by the sleeve. He hears every rumor first. He improves it slightly for balance. By the third repetition, Waterloo has been decided twice before breakfast and once again before luncheon. The Royal Exchange gathered all this into one low thunder. Brokers' voices struck the marble and came back softer. Government paper changed hands with a dry, expensive crinkle. Gloves flashed pale in the dimness, and hats brushed close beneath the colonnade. Nathan Mayer Rothschild was near his usual place. Later memory would fuse him with that marble spot so completely that he became the column, which he practically was. European finance, at moments like this, seemed to lean on him and wait. There is something wonderfully ordinary about his stage. It was not a hidden vault. It was a public pillar in a noisy room. Nathan at his column was the original posting to FinTech Twitter, except everyone had to stand up for the screenshot. From New Court and St. Swithin's Lane to the Exchange was only a short walk. Clerks could hurry between office and market in minutes. A letter could be opened, skimmed, carried over, and turned into a facial expression before the wax had cooled. This closeness mattered more than romance. Nathan did not need a secret tunnel. He needed good shoes, quick clerks, and a habit of standing where everyone could find him. Much of power in business looks from a quiet chair, like punctuality with better tailoring. What can be placed on the 20th is plain enough. Nathan was in the market. He was seen at the Exchange. He was conducting business in the ordinary way of a man whose ordinary way happened to attract a crowd. That is already a problem for the famous tale. The theater version wants him pale and stricken, drifting in like bad weather. The real Nathan appears sturdier and more routine than that, which is sadly unfair to storytellers and very kind to archivists. London on the 20th did have news of a sort. It had fragments from the continent. It had letters from Brussels and Ghent. It had commercial hints, military guesses, and one of those general atmospheres in which nobody knows anything, yet everybody speaks as if they do. Some reports suggested a great battle had happened. Some suggested the French had been checked. Some said there had been terrible uncertainty, which was safely true, because there always had been. The city breathed all this in with its tea and tobacco smoke. The bond market does not enjoy poetry, it enjoys information, even when the information arrives in pieces and smells faintly of seawater. So on the 20th, prices did what prices usually do under partial news. They edged, wavered, and waited. The later story needs a crash. It needs Nathan selling great heaps of stock, frightening the room into a stampede. That scene is so vivid that people keep remembering it, despite the tiresome fact that the actual price lists behave nothing like a stampede. In the reading room, the quotations sit quietly on the page. There are no dramatic chasms. There are fractions and half points. The numbers move in the upper 56s and thereabouts, like a cat stretching rather than leaping. Consols, the old government mainstay, do not fall through the floor on the 20th. Other public funds show the same calm refusal to perform legend. The market is nervous, yes, but nervous in the pedestrian style of men shifting estimates, not overturning benches. A printed list from the week has the modesty of all true evidence. Thin paper, tight type, figures squeezed into columns. If a titan had secretly smashed the market, the sheet has kept a very straight face about it. This matters because panic leaves tracks. It widens spreads. It drives prices hard downward. It produces comment. The recorded movement around these days looks far too small, and in places too firm, for the great collapse later pamphlets describe. On the 19th and 20th, the tone was mixed, but not catastrophic. By the time confidence improved, quotations rose in a way that fits broad relief. They did not first dive theatrically, then spring upward from Nathan's private little crater. You can almost hear the clerks marking fractions with worn pens. A quarter point here, another there. Someone smooths the edge of the sheet with a thumb. Great conspiracy, when it enters contact with bookkeeping, tends to become a slightly disappointing arithmetic problem. That does not mean no one profited from speed. People always did. It means the profit sits in hours, judgment, and nerve. It does not sit in a melodramatic plunge so huge that everyone in London somehow forgot to write it down properly. The room itself also resists the myth. Eyewitness descriptions of the exchange floor are busy and crowded. Men listened in knots. Jobbers shouted rates across a gap. Servants threaded through with notes. Nobody there had the stillness required for a one-man stage play. Nathan was noticeable because he was always noticeable. He was compact, watchful, and difficult to read. That unreadable face did a great deal of later work for the imagination, because people dislike a blank expression and rush to decorate it. If he sold a little or bought a little, the room would have watched. If he stood still, the room would have watched that too. The column had the great disadvantage of becoming evidence even while doing almost nothing at all. This is the point where Mr. Higginbotham earns his keep again. He sees Nathan turn away from one broker. By the time the tale reaches a third person, Nathan has renounced Britain, buried the funds, and ordered the moon to decline by half a point. Yet the surviving accounts are smaller and duller. They place Nathan at his usual station. They remember him calm. Some later witnesses even suggest he was buying when others hesitated, which is not the same thing as staging the collapse of civilization. There is no neat row of contemporaries describing a grand trick. There is no chorus from the 20th saying the market was fooled by one man's tragic posture. That chorus arrives later, once later writers know the ending and can seize in memory accordingly. The official ending, meanwhile, was still on the water or the road. Henry Percy had not yet delivered Wellington's dispatch into the heart of government. London on the 20th was trading partly on inference, partly on foreign letters, and largely on temperament. When Percy finally reached London with the dispatch, it was late and properly ceremonial. Doors had to be opened. Ministers had to be found. The papers had to be handed over in that careful official way which turns human exhaustion into state business. The famous moment came with those captured eagles, awkwardly splendid and very real. Percy brought trophies as well as text. It is one of those details the archive keeps because governments, like households, enjoy a good object on the sideboard. Only then did certainty thicken. Gazette publication followed. Bells rang. Crowds gathered. The city gained the kind of confidence that comes from the government saying, in effect, yes, this paper is the paper, and this messenger is our messenger. The market's earlier uncertainty now looks almost tender. Men had been pricing not victory itself, But the chance of it. They had been reading a storm through cloud color. Once the official sun finally appeared, they adjusted without needing any invented thunderbolt. If you sit with the price tables long enough, the week becomes oddly domestic. Monday is a day of not quite knowing. Tuesday is a day of rumors growing firmer. Wednesday and Thursday bring fuller assurance. History often turns out to have kept shop hours. This is why the documentary trail feels so calming after the legend. It does not rush. It places one paper after another on the table. It lets each small piece keep its own weight, and the whole picture grows by accumulation, not astonishment. One of the strongest pieces is simply the timing. Waterloo was fought on the 18th. Official dispatch moved on the 19th. Nathan was observed in London on the 20th. Official certainty arrived later. The intervals are mundane, but they govern everything. Another strong piece is the geography of information. Brussels, Ghent, Antwerp, Ostend, Dover, London. Each point had merchants, agents, postmasters, sailors, and opportunities for delay. The Rothschild world understood these points the way a good cook understands heat on a stove. They had correspondents who wrote plainly and often. They used duplicate letters on different routes. They had boats when possible, riders when needed, and a family habit of assuming that a message not yet sent was a small personal failure. So yes, they often knew things quickly. The advantage was real. It was also made of paperwork, expense accounts, and wet boots. The Rothschild courier network was basically 19th century DHL. If DHL had pigeons, horses, and one very demanding customer in a dark coat. Henri, our faithful overworked courier, hovers at the edge of every such file. He is forever crossing the channel in a damp collar. He has not slept properly since 1812. He is the patron saint of envelopes that arrive before governments are emotionally ready. But fast is not the same as magical. A private letter could precede an official dispatch by hours. It might offer strong confidence before public confirmation. It still had to travel in ink on paper, with all the old risks of bad roads and worse seas. And private news could be partial. A banker might learn that the French had been beaten before he knew precisely how complete the result was. He might hear that Brussels was safe before he saw Wellington's words. Markets live very comfortably on such imperfect gradations. This is the real informational edge. It sounds almost too sensible to tell at parties. Better logistics gave earlier probabilities. Earlier probabilities let a man with capital act sooner. The profit lies in being right a little earlier than others, not in hypnotizing a nation. For Nathan, that edge also fit the kind of business he actually ran. He handled bills, remittances, bullion, and government paper across borders. He needed fast information not for one theatrical ambush, but for the daily care and feeding of an enormous financial machine. New Court was not a wizard's tower. It was an office full of clerks, ledgers, quills, sandshakers, and folded foreign letters. Men copied rates, checked signatures, and counted time and post departures. The glamour, as usual, mostly sat on top of filing. When news from the Low Countries reached that office, it would have been compared, sorted, and weighed. Which hand wrote it, which route brought it, which earlier letter it matched. Good firms did not swallow rumors whole, even when Mr. Higginbotham served them warm. Then Nathan could go the short distance to the exchange and act. He might buy because improving news made British credit look stronger. He might hold because uncertainty still deserved respect. Either way, the action would emerge from routine judgment rather than stagecraft. This is the archive's quiet correction. The Rothschilds were impressive because they built systems. They paid attention to roads, boats, clerks, and cousins. They were load-bearing not because they could conjure truth from air, but because they had arranged to receive it efficiently. The later myth prefers a lone mastermind, because lone masterminds fit pamphlets better than postal networks. In 1846, Georges Mathieu d'Erneville published the famous poisonous version under the name Satan, which really does raise questions about editorial judgment from the first line onward. His tale gave readers what they liked to repeat. One villain, one market trick, one nation fooled at the perfect moment. In modern terms, it was a viral thread from an anonymous account named Satan, and people shared it anyway, with admirable confidence. By then, memory had softened into anecdote. The exchange floor of 1815 could be rearranged into a little theater. Nathan's unreadable face became sinister. Ordinary buying became monstrous cunning. A week of partial news became one impossible instant of total private certainty. The spell weakens under lamplight. One witness is late, another is second-hand. A printed price list refuses to cooperate. Henry Percy's travel time stays stubbornly physical. The legend begins to look like a fine coat hung on a broom. And still, there is something worth keeping from the older tale. Nathan was important. His network was fast. He did stand at that column and draw every eye. A myth does not attach itself to nobody, much as Mr. Higginbotham sometimes tries. It is only that importance has a dull texture when you touch it closely. It feels like sealed packets. It smells like damp leather and wax. It sounds like a clerk clearing his throat before reading a Belgian letter aloud in a room that suddenly listens. The truth about Waterloo in London is not that one man secretly knew everything. It is that several channels of knowledge flowed at different speeds. Official dispatch was one channel, merchant correspondence was another. Rumor, the broad, muddy river beneath them all, was a third. On the 20th, those channels had not yet joined into certainty. They crossed and tangled. Men at the exchange listened for the government's voice, while already trading on continental hints. That is less like sorcery, and more like trying to finish supper while the kettle thinks things over. So the gap between archive and legend opens gently. In the papers, Percy is delayed by weather and process. Nathan is present, active, and ordinary at his column. The funds move by fractions. The room hums, speculates, and carries on in its expensive shoes. That hum is almost the whole chapter. It is the sound of a city learning something important in layers, not once, but several times, first through whispers, then through letters, then through the state's own seal, each layer settling over the last like blankets, and in the middle of it stands the column. He neither confirms nor denies. He absorbs glances. He does business. He lets other men invent speeches for him, which is a very old privilege of the silent and the successful. You turn one more page, and the dates stay where they were put. The 18th remains the battle. The 20th remains the exchange under rumor. Official certainty arrives later, on its own slow feet, and the greatest money myth of the century loses a little more shine. That is often how the past behaves when handled gently. It does not collapse, it clears, and in that clearing, with paper under your hand and London murmuring beyond the glass, the truth looks smaller than legend, but far more solid. In the warm reading room, the papers lie flat under your hand like tame little weather systems. They smell of dust, starch, and old paste, and each one promises a simpler story than it gives. This is the famous one. It arrives polished already, with its boots brushed, its timing perfect, and its villainy folded into neat financial corners. Outside the window, London is only a thought. Inside, the candle wax softens, the fire ticks, and the tale walks back toward the Royal Exchange. Morning gathers first on the marble floor. It lifts in pale light around hats, coat sleeves, damp boot leather, and the white breath of men just in from the street. The exchange has its own music. There is the low thunder of brokers' voices, the dry whisper of paper, and a soft scrape of gloves along stone. Printer's ink lingers on the newest sheets. Wax from seals mixes with wet wool, snuff, and the faint sour note of too much coffee. At the same hour, as always, Nathan Rothschild appears by his usual place. He leans near his familiar pillar so often that the room gives him a second name. They call him the column. It is half joke, half map reference, and half practical truth, which is already too many halves. At least not in the way an actor is. He is compact, heavy in the middle, plainly dressed for a rich man, and careful with every small movement. That is why the rumor loves this first image so much. A loud man looking gloomy would only be a loud man looking gloomy, but a quiet man, famous for knowing things early, has another kind of power. You can feel the room lean toward him without seeming to. A hat brim shifts, a shoulder turns, a hand pauses over a folded note. In the rumor, this is the morning after Waterloo. The city does not yet know the result, and the air is crowded with waiting. The waiting has texture. It is in the stiff cuffs, the polished cane handles, the cold coins in waistcoat pockets, and the unlit end of a candle. Everyone knows Rothschild's network is quick. Henri the courier has probably crossed the channel again, still damp, still hungry, and still not sleeping since 1812. So the first pleasure of the story is simple. If news reaches London early, it must have reached the column first. That is how the tale arranges the furniture. It sets Nathan at his pillar, gives him hidden knowledge, and then asks the room to study his face. The face matters almost more than the supposed message. The rumor does not picture him weeping or wringing his hands like a stage uncle. That would be too much. It gives him something better, because smaller things feel truer when markets are involved. He is said to look grave. He is said to be pale, withdrawn, sorrowful, even defeated, all by the tiny motion of a body at rest. A gloved hand may tighten on the stone, a mouth may flatten, a chin may dip, a coat may hang a little heavier than usual. This is perfect market theater because it is almost nothing. Almost nothing is where people do their most confident guessing. The exchange runs on such guessing every day. One man notes a shrug, another hears a whisper, and by luncheon, it has grown a respectable waistcoat. Mr. Higginbotham in spirit is already awake inside the rumor. He has seen the column look sad from 12 yards away, and he has improved the sadness before breakfast. There is a pleasing neatness to this part. The richest clue in the room is not a letter, not a courier, but a mood that feels modern in an annoying, recognizable way. Nathan at the pillar becomes the original posting to fintech Twitter, except no one can refresh the page. So the brokers watch. They watch a stillness, and the stillness becomes a statement, and the statement acquires a military shape. In the claim, Nathan has learned that Wellington has lost. The loss travels not first by trumpet or minister, but by expression. This is the second hinge of the myth. If he says nothing, then others may say everything for him. The room is ripe for it. There are newspapers not yet right, letters not yet opened, clerks with sand on their fingers, and men pretending calm. A government bond certificate passes from one gloved hand to another. Its paper crackles softly, like dry leaves in a polite autumn. Consols are the heart of the matter here. They are safe, solid, boring in the way money likes best, which makes them ideal for dramatic stories. The rumor asks you to picture the chain reaction. One broker notices Rothschild's supposed gloom. Another notices the broker noticing. A third decides caution looks clever. No one in the tale needs a full sentence. A lifted brow will do. A small retreat will do. One man folding a paper too quickly will do. Soon the air fills with the kind of certainty made from vapor. Wellington is beaten, someone says, though perhaps he says only, "This looks bad." There is no sharp edge to the message at first. It spreads like steam from a damp coat by a fire, and it reaches everyone anyway. The marble floor gives the voices a round, carrying sound. From the far side of the room, words arrive blurred and somehow more convincing. That is one reason the story clings. Anyone who has ever stood in a busy room knows how truth and tone trade hats. You hear the market changing before you know the words. A clerk hurries past with ribbons in his fingers. A messenger wipes mud from one boot against the doormat and fails only partly. Someone opens a watch, snaps it shut, and opens it again. All these tiny motions serve the rumor beautifully. They make the setting feel exact, which helps the invention wear a clean collar. The central claim is now in motion. Nathan knows Britain has lost, or wants others to think so, and London reads defeat in his shoulders. No one in this version asks for hard proof. The hard proof would ruin the pleasant machinery. Instead, the market does what the market in stories always does. It panics with excellent timing and a talent for cooperation it never shows in ordinary life. You can almost hear the first urgent sales. They come in clipped voices, with ink still drying on notes and perspiration under expensive cloth. Paper begins to change hands faster. The crinkle of certificates grows brisk. Pen nibs scratch. Seals warm near candle flames. Some men sell because they believe the rumor. Some sell because other men believe the rumor, which is often the more practical form of belief. A hat is pushed back. A wig itches. A sleeve catches on a desk corner. A broker swallows the last bitter mouthful of coffee. Prices in the story do not merely fall. They sink through the floor with the delightful speed that all later retellings prefer. This is the panic stage, and it is painted with loving care. The same accounts that cannot agree on sums can describe a crowd selling with almost tender precision. Brokers rush to unload consoles. Widows' savings, merchants' reserves, careful family money, and dull institutional holdings all seem suddenly unbearable. The word panic does a lot of work. It turns ordinary caution into a flock of startled geese, though the geese here wear broadcloth and carry ledgers. You can see the mechanics so clearly. Bad news means government weakness. Government weakness means bond prices fall. Falling prices invite more selling. Down they go together. Nothing in that chain feels exotic. It is household logic dressed in market clothes, which makes the myth purr contentedly. The story also enjoys the little indignity of mass imitation. No one wants to be the last respectable person holding paper that the column appears to distrust. And because the room already trusts Rothschild's information, his silence becomes louder than speech. A quiet man can sometimes shout by declining to speak at all. Soon the exchange in the tale is thick with hurried bargains. Hands lift and lower. Figures are murmured. Clerks blot wet ink with sand and sleeve cuffs. Outside, carriage wheels pass over damp streets. Inside, the nation is apparently being repriced by body language. It is such an efficient picture. One man leans sadly, and several million pounds become nervous. Then comes the turn that gives the whole fable its wicked grin. While everyone else throws paper away, Nathan is supposed to buy. Not openly, of course. The story knows better than to ruin itself with obviousness. He buys in secret, through agents, through fronts, through little human curtains who do the grabbing, while he stays mournful. This part always becomes a little more crowded in the telling. Anonymous brokers appear. Trusted men fan out. Orders travel hand to hand beneath the public storm. The image is busy and satisfying. Some poor clerk is forever being sent back into the crush, with one more instruction and no proper luncheon. You can feel the squeeze of the scene. A narrow space between shoulders, the heat of bodies in wool, the polished edge of a ledger against your hip. One agent buys a parcel, another buys more, a third pretends indifference, while collecting yet another bundle of suddenly cheap consoles. The panic price is the key delight. The rumor needs the bonds to become absurdly cheap, almost insultingly cheap, so the profit can later bloom like a greenhouse melon. And Nathan in the tale has the calm to wait exactly long enough. He lets fear do the softening first. Then he gathers up the market from the floor as if picking dropped pins. There is admiration in the structure, even from people who dislike him. A trick this neat feels like craftsmanship. The exchange itself helps the picture along. Marble columns, echoing space, formal clothes, and small signs read too closely all make conspiracy look well furnished. Modern readers sometimes imagine one single dramatic purchase. The old versions usually prefer a more granular feast. It is much more pleasing to picture lots broken apart. Bits of national credit are nibbled from anxious hands, one certificate after another. A blue ribbon comes loose around a packet. A seal flakes onto the desk. A penknife trims a quill. Someone asks the price twice, hoping it will improve. Meanwhile, the column remains the column. He does not grin, he does not leap about. He merely continues being infuriatingly unreadable in public. That detail is essential. If he looked pleased, the spell would break, and everyone would stop selling. So the story gives him discipline worthy of a monk, a banker, or a man avoiding any useful quote. The result is a very clean diagram. False gloom at the pillar above, panic in the room below, secret buying at the edges, riches later. This mechanical neatness matters more than many listeners first notice. People trust stories that show every cog. If each part clicks into the next, the whole thing feels earned. There is also something oddly domestic in it. A market is confusing, but a trick is easy. Anyone can follow a trick. One person bluffs, others misread, goods become cheap, the bluffer buys, later the truth arrives and prices rebound. It is a card table pattern. You do not need a degree in finance to feel how it works under your fingers. That's why the rumor survives, even in retellings that mangle the details. The bones are sturdy, so the flesh can be quite fanciful. And the sums do become fanciful. Once Nathan has supposedly bought enough consoles at the bottom, the story needs an ending worthy of all that patience. So the profit appears. At first it is very large in a plausible way, then it grows larger with every room it enters, which is what money does in stories and fish do at docks. One version gives him a fortune, another gives him several fortunes, a third implies he practically bought Britain before supper. The numbers stroll upward with cheerful confidence. Millions appear, then tens of millions, then rounder and more glorious totals that no one pauses to measure. A nice precise figure would almost spoil the mood. The myth prefers the kind of arithmetic done by raised eyebrows. He made a killing, some later voice says, though the phrase is much too lively for this quiet room. He doubled his wealth, says another. He bought half the government, says a third, who almost certainly has Mr. Higginbotham somewhere in the family tree. By then the transaction has become a moral puppet show without the morals. Greed, nerve, speed, and silence all stand in clear little poses. That is very hard for the mind to resist. Large sums make the earlier scenes glow brighter in memory. If the profit is merely respectable, then the gloomy leaning seems small and accidental. If the profit is enormous, every twitch at the pillar becomes destiny. So later tellings enlarge both ends together. The sorrow grows darker, the panic grows wider, the buying grows stealthier, the profit grows wonderfully silly. In some retellings, the gain lands almost before the ink dries. In others it swells over days, as if compounding on narrative pleasure alone. No one fusses much about the practical limits. How much stock could one man quietly absorb? How low did prices truly fall? Who sold enough to feed the legend? Those questions are tidy, but they are not beloved. The beloved part is the inversion. The Sphinx at the column walks another way and pockets the map. There is also an old comfort in blaming one brilliant operator. Markets are messy, nations are messy, and information moves in ugly knots. A single mastermind makes the clutter feel arranged. The listener can picture him. He is stout, composed, dark-coated, still beside the marble, while all around him cloth rustles and judgment wobbles. This is almost impossible for the imagination to refuse. A room of nerves is one thing. A room of nerves organized by one silent man is much better furniture. Even the courier network fits the rhythm too neatly. Henry arrives ahead of the government, dripping on the threshold like 19th century DHL with a pigeon side hustle. You scarcely need more than that. Fast private news is already suspicious enough to feed a century of gossip. And the setting behaves like an accomplice. Regency London offers smoky coffee houses, narrow streets, candlelit offices, and the pleasant idea that information comes by horse and packet boat. That makes early knowledge feel rare and almost magical. If the same story happened in a modern dealing room, it would sound administrative. Here it smells of wax and wet leather, which is much better. The rumor also borrows authority from the family name. The Rothschilds are already linked by couriers, brothers, drafts, ledgers, and improbable speed across Europe. A network that efficient invites fables. People assume that if the brothers could move letters quickly, they could also move events, feelings, and entire governments with a glance. That is the cognitive trick hidden under the anecdote. Real skill makes unreal power seem only one step further on. You see it in ordinary life all the time. Someone competent at one thing is soon credited with secret mastery of 6 other things. The story of Waterloo uses that habit with great tenderness. First it grants Nathan speed, then it grants him certainty, then social control, then perfect concealment, then almost comic profit. Each new grant feels modest when taken alone. Placed in a row, they amount to a very handsome miracle. By now the image of the column has become almost portable. He no longer needs the actual exchange to exist. He can stand in any retelling and still perform his silence. Pamphlets adore such figures. Memoirs adore them even more, especially when written after everyone has had time to improve conversations they never heard. Later writers do their part. They set the room, darken the coat, sharpen the cheek, and let the sorrowful pose work like a stage light. Then the tale receives its printed afterlife. In 1846, a French pamphleteer under the pen name Satan helps give the legend a durable set of legs. That choice of pen name still raises several quiet questions about editorial judgment. Still, people shared it anyway. It was a viral thread by an anonymous account named Satan, and somehow that was not disqualifying. Once printed, the mechanics become even harder to shake. A written story can be reread, quoted, simplified, and borrowed by people who enjoy the engine more than the evidence. Each retelling sands away friction. Soon the body language is clearer than real body language ever is. Soon the rumor of defeat is tidier than rumors ever are. Soon the purchases are more comprehensive than any likely set of purchases could be. and soon the prophet sits on the page like a jeweled teapot. It gleams because it is too ornate for daily use. You can watch the myth getting stronger merely by becoming smoother. Real events usually have corners. This one keeps losing them until it fits neatly into the hand. That smoothness is one reason it feels true. Another is that it flatters the listener. The plot invites you to think, yes, that is exactly how people behave around money. And in broad outline, it often is. People do watch the powerful for cues. They do sell because others sell. They do mistake confidence for knowledge and knowledge for omnipotence. So the tale mixes a few very human habits into one polished loaf. It tastes familiar even when the ingredients are overworked. The body language part is especially sticky. Humans are helpless before faces, especially when they think the face belongs to better information. One set jaw can outweigh a dozen documents in the imagination. You know this without needing the lesson. A room can turn gloomy because one trusted person stops smiling. The Waterloo rumor simply upgrades that ordinary weakness into national finance, and the sorrowful leaning is a masterstroke because it asks so little of belief. No forged letter is required. No grand speech is needed. Only posture. Posture leaves no paper trail. It leaves only memory, and memory is a cheerful upholsterer. It pads the scene, deepens the folds, and gives everyone better lines. That is why the story remains vivid even when the numbers wobble. The exact profit may drift, but the body at the column stays put. You can return to it easily. You can smell the ink, hear the mutter, and picture the gloved hands tightening on their consoles. The exchange becomes a kind of theater without tickets. Each broker is both audience and performer, and Nathan's silence is the headline act. Mr. Higginbotham thrives in this environment. He does not need facts. He needs a plausible angle, a fast tongue, and 3 men willing to nod. By the time the rumor reaches its third owner, it already looks house-trained. Someone always says they heard it from someone close to the source. The source naturally is standing right there, saying nothing useful. That silence is worth dwelling on, because silence is elastic. It stretches to fit the listener's fear. If Nathan had looked cheerful, that would have meant one thing. If he looked grave, that would mean another. If he looked merely busy, someone could still embroider the hem. The myth chooses grief because grief is unmistakable at a distance, or at least it is unmistakable after later writers have finished with it. Then there is the rebound. The story cannot leave the bonds on the floor forever. Soon enough, the true news arrives. Wellington has won. Britain exhales. Prices recover. Nathan blooms. This closing snap is deliciously exact. The false signal and the true report close together like the jaws of a trap. All the people who sold are now doubly foolish. They were frightened once and then punished for being frightened, which stories consider a very proper symmetry. Nathan, meanwhile, becomes richer by sitting still, knowing early, and buying when everyone else trembled. It is the dream of every clever operator and every envious observer. The market rewards nerve. The dull crowd pays tuition. The man with superior information wins the prize and keeps a straight face. No wonder later generations repeat it. It contains all the old human seasonings: secret knowledge, swift horses, a public mask, a hidden hand, and a crowd eager to read signals into weather. Even the setting carries class comfort. One imagines polished boots and marble columns rather than back rooms and ordinary drudgery. Yet the drudgery is there if you look. There are clerks blotting ink, messengers nursing blisters, bookkeepers counting columns, and someone forever mending a frayed ribbon. That humble labor makes the grand trick feel grounded. The best myths keep their shoes muddy. They offer enough routine detail that the impossible part can sit quietly in the middle. A letter is folded, a seal is broken, a broker coughs into a handkerchief. A decision tips a market. You can see why a financial historian in a warm room keeps returning to these pages. The story is almost too well made. It explains a complex event with one expression, one false cue, and one terrible morning among the consoles. It also tells people what they already half believe, that markets are ruled not only by value, but by nerves, that rich men know things earlier than governments, that silence is sometimes louder than a bell, and most of all, that crowds can be steered by watching one man lean against a pillar. It is such a clean little machine. Every gear is visible, every motive legible, and every outcome gratifying to the suspicious mind. That is why the rumor remains cognitively difficult to disbelieve, not because every fact is firm, but because the pattern feels emotionally complete. The human brain likes tidy causes. It likes a visible puppet hand much better than 1,000 stray fingers. So the tale of Waterloo keeps its shape. Nathan at the column looks sorrowful. Brokers read defeat. Consoles fall. Agents buy. Fortune arrives in a neat dark coat. Back in the reading room, the fire settles lower. The page under your hand has gone quiet again, though the murmur from the exchange still seems to hover inside it. You can almost feel the paper of those bonds. You can hear the marble giving back every rumor, softened and enlarged, until it sounds like fact. And there at the center stands the column. He says nothing, confirms nothing, denies nothing, and remains load-bearing infrastructure for other people's imagination. That perhaps is the most satisfying part of all. A man need only stand still, and history will happily do the rest. The paper feels softer than you expect. It has that tired, cottony give of a pamphlet handled by many calm, suspicious fingers. You sit in a warm reading room with the grate breathing low heat. The air smells of dust, leather, and a little old glue. A clerk has brought the item on a padded rest. Its wrapper is plain, its printing is cramped, its confidence is not small. On the title page sits a name that would make even a sleepy cataloger blink twice. The author calls himself Saturn. It is not a subtle choice. It raises several questions about editorial judgment. Still, the 19th century could be oddly relaxed about these things. The ink has browned at the edges of the letters. The paper shows faint chain lines when you tilt it toward the lamp. The corners are blunted from travel. This is Georges Mathieu d'Ernval, or so the page says once you look past the costume. He was a French pamphlet writer with a sharp ear for public irritation. He was not writing in a vacuum. That year had a certain tightness in the air. You can almost hear the thin rustle of cheap newspapers in Paris cafes. Cups click on saucers. Chairs scrape tiled floors. Men fold and refold political sheets with inky thumbs. Pamphlets were small enough for a coat pocket and grand enough for a grievance. They could be bought beside newspapers, tucked under an arm, and quoted over coffee. This one came dressed for attention. It did not arrive as a shy memorandum. It arrived like a person entering a room in a dark cape. The pen name matters because it tells you the mood before the first sentence begins. The author wants heat, theater, and the thrill of forbidden knowledge. Modern people would call it branding. A viral thread, written by an anonymous account named Satan, would still collect shares, which is faintly discouraging. The odd thing is how ordinary the object remains in the hand. It is light. It is a little rough. It smells faintly of paste and storage. Nothing about the stitching predicts a legend. Yet legends often come in cheap wrappers. They like being affordable. You turn a page and see how the sentences push forward. They do not creep. They march. They promise revelation. That is part of the comfort of this moment in the archive. The myth does not emerge from mist. It emerges from a printer. Before this pamphlet, stories about Nathan Rothschild looked smaller and less theatrical. They praised speed. They hinted at skill. They did not yet perform the full stage play. Earlier accounts often said he had faster news than other men. That much was believable. His family had riders, boats, clerks, and letters moving in steady lines. Henry the courier appears here in spirit, wet from the channel and 3 hours short on sleep. The family network was 19th century DHL, if DHL employed more horses and fewer weekends. There had long been talk of the Rothschild talent for information. Couriers arrived, prices moved, ledgers opened, clerks copied figures by candle wax and printer's ink. Fast news could make a fortune without any melodrama at all. A few hours mattered, a few minutes mattered. Markets love a head start. In older tellings, Waterloo was useful because it showed the family system at work. News crossed Europe. Nathan heard early. He traded well. That version already had enough shine for gossip. It needed no costume change. It did not yet say he fooled all London with a single solemn gesture. Mathieu d'Ernval gives the tale a firmer shape and a richer varnish. He names the scene. He sharpens the motive. He adds a very public performance. Now Nathan stands at the Royal Exchange beside his usual marble support. The column is present, unreadable as ever, which does help a story immensely. In the pamphlet version, he learns that Napoleon has lost before the government says so. He goes to the exchange at once and appears crushed. He begins to sell. Others watch. Others whisper. Government bonds change hands in a nervous flutter of paper and gloves. You can hear the room the way the legend wants you to hear it. Brokers murmur under the marble roof. Shoes tap stone. Someone coughs into a handkerchief. Nathan says little or nothing at all. That detail is important. Silence is a superb prop. The pamphlet says the market takes his mood for a message. If the great Rothschild is selling, disaster must have happened. So others sell as well. Prices fall, fear spreads, consoles slide downward. Mr. Higginbotham in spirit has by now told 12 men before breakfast and improved the story twice. Then comes the clever turn. While the room is in a flutter, Nathan's agents quietly buy up what everyone else is throwing away. By the end, the pamphlet suggests he has swallowed a huge share of British government stock. One man, one morning, one trick, and a kingdom's paper nestles in his pocket. It is a neat story because it fits on a postcard. It is also much grander than the earlier versions. Grandness travels well. The difference matters. Earlier stories admired efficiency. This one worships hidden mastery. It turns quick intelligence into secret control. That shift is where the later myth really takes shape. The pamphlet no longer describes a banker with advantages. It describes a puppeteer with strings everywhere. It gives the tale a stage, a costume, and a magic act. Nathan becomes less a traitor than a conjurer leaning against marble. You can almost see why the image stuck. The Royal Exchange already looked theatrical. Candle smoke, wet wool, sealing wax, and the low thunder of brokers' voices did the rest. The column, standing there every morning, was already the original posting to FinTech Twitter. He gave away nothing, and everyone screenshot him with their eyes. Yet the older record is less obliging than the pamphlet. Contemporary reports are patchy, dates vary, numbers swell and shrink with each retelling. Some accounts say he had good news early. Some accounts say he traded actively on government funds. Few early pieces make him sole master of the market. The pamphlet is where the story gains its clean, dramatic hinge. Public despair first, secret buying next, vast dominion by lunchtime. It is excellent narrative carpentry. Each plank fits the next. Truth, unfortunately, is not always built with such tidy joinery. When you set the pamphlet beside earlier material, the extra paint is easy to spot. The details are sharper. The morals are darker. The confidence is louder. That louder confidence belongs to 1846 as much as to Waterloo. France in that year had a long list of irritations and not much patience. The July monarchy had grown stale around the edges. Ministers seemed settled. Favors seemed to circulate. Great fortunes looked suspiciously comfortable in official light. On Paris streets, you can picture polished boots beside muddy hems. Omnibuses creak. Shop windows show gloves, newspapers, and little stacks of engraved prints. In cafes, men warm their hands on cups and complain in moderate voices. They complain about prices, jobs, contracts, influence, and the large invisible machinery of money. A banker family made a useful symbol for such feelings. A foreign banker family made an even better one. A very rich one better still. The Rothschilds had houses in several capitals and relatives in several offices. To admirers that meant range. To enemies it meant a web. This was the age when finance became both ordinary and ghostly. Everyone knew money moved. Few people could see how it moved. That gap between movement and understanding is perfect soil for myth. A bond certificate is only paper, after all, until it starts to feel like weather. In the reading room, you can imagine the objects that fed such feelings. Crisp prospectuses, folded share lists, letters with foreign stamps, thick account books with ruled blue lines. The world of high banking looked tidy on the desk and mysterious at a distance. That distance did a great deal of work. French resentment toward the great banking houses had many sources and many shades. Some people disliked speculation, some disliked court influence, some simply disliked being left out. Foreign dynasties offered a ready outline for all those dislikes. They could get sketched as remote, clever, and somehow too connected. The pamphlet does not invent that mood from nothing. It harvests it. Then it presses it into a very portable story. Matthew Dernvale chooses his moment with shrewd timing. He publishes when readers are primed to believe that hidden money explains public life. There is no need for ledgers in such a mood. There is hardly any need for dates. A satisfying pattern will do. You can feel the polemical energy in the way the pamphlet points its finger. It likes not only wealth but concentrated wealth. It likes not only success but secret success. It also likes the idea of foreignness behaving as a single will. That is one of its favorite simplifications. Families become factions. Networks become plots. This is where the story begins to carry a quieter cargo. The pamphlet builds on old habits of suspicion about Jewish financiers without always pausing to name them directly. It does not need to shout every ugly assumption aloud. It lets certain words and shapes do the work in a low voice. A family is shown as unnaturally close. A business network is shown as almost tribal. Speed becomes proof of conspiracy rather than proof of organization. Silence helps again. Nathan's unreadable face becomes sinister because the tale insists that unreadability itself must hide a scheme. That is why the column works so well in this kind of writing. He is not merely quiet, he is made to stand for hidden intent. Ordinary banking tools are also recast as suspicious objects. Couriers, coded letters, kinship ties, and quick information become evidence of something almost supernatural. But these things were often simply the furniture of long-distance trade. Horses needed changing, boats needed tides, clerks needed steady wrists and sharp knives for opening seals. The pamphlet prefers a darker architecture. It takes mundane coordination and frames it as secret dominion. That is the important turn. You see the same trick in lesser details. A family dinner becomes a council, a messenger becomes a spy, a successful purchase becomes a theft by cleverness. Once that logic is in place, every ordinary competence starts glowing strangely. If a letter arrives early, it must be sinister. If brothers cooperate, it must be a cabal. This is how prejudice often lays flooring under a story before anyone notices. The reader walks across it because the boards have been stained to match the room. It also helps that the Waterloo setting is so clean and memorable. One battle, one day, one man at one column. History prefers a clear hallway. Real finance, by contrast, tends to happen in ledgers, half-heard news, drafts, discounts, and long afternoons of waiting. That makes for poor pamphleteering. So the pamphlet gives readers a concentrated syrup of causation. The empire of money is explained by one deceitful performance before lunch. There is pleasure in that neatness. It relieves confusion. It turns systems into characters, and characters into villains. The strange thing is how quickly such neatness travels when printers smell demand. A story can cross a border much faster than a correction. Soon the pamphlet was translated and adapted beyond France. German publishers took it up with interest. British readers met it in extracts, retellings, and later embellishments. You can picture compositors lifting tiny metal letters from their cases. They set lines by hand. They wipe ink from their fingers onto aprons already striped with yesterday's work. Sheets dry on lines or lie in stacks on tables. Translators shave a phrase here and sharpen a phrase there. A local publisher adds a preface with useful indignation. No one needs to reproduce every word exactly. The shape is enough. Nathan at the exchange, false despair, market panic, secret buying, vast gain. That shape moves beautifully across languages. It is simple. It flatters the reader with inside knowledge. It promises that history can be solved like a riddle. Germany in particular had its own strong market for such stories. Political unease, social change, and older anti-Jewish habits gave the tale familiar hooks. British readers, meanwhile, had the extra pleasure of seeing their own financial temple used as a stage. The Royal Exchange made a handsome background. A translated myth often acquires a local accent very quickly. In one place the stress falls on foreign intrigue, in another it falls on market trickery. Printers knew what to underline for their audience. Some editions thickened the political complaint, others leaned harder on the family name. Cheap reprints helped. So did newspaper snippets. So did the ordinary human urge to repeat a scandal that feels both clever and easy to remember. Once Mr. Higginbotham enters print, he becomes difficult to evict. A rumor that reaches a third person begins furnishing itself for a longer stay. The British versions are especially interesting for their mild self-importance. They present the tale as if London had always known, which it mostly had not. German versions could be more doctrinal and more eager to sort people into hidden camps. The skeleton stayed the same. The local flesh changed. In all of them, the pamphlet's innovations remained intact. Nathan's supposed public signal mattered most. The panic mattered second. Secret accumulation mattered most of all. That public signal is the key to the myth's afterlife, because it can be imagined so easily. You need only a room, a face, and a falling price. Facts with more moving parts rarely win these contests. They arrive wearing boots and paperwork. Myths arrive in a good coat and never stop smiling. Back in the reading room, the pages feel less mysterious now that you know their family tree. Not older truth, but later embroidery lies before you. The source that many people cite as inherited memory is often this printed invention, directly or by long echo. The rumor has an address after all. Matthew Darnvale did not create every suspicion from nothing. He gathered existing scraps. He arranged them into a more poisonous bouquet. That arrangement is the real craft here. He knows where to place silence. He knows when to whisper foreignness. He knows the value of a single dramatic morning. Even the pen name earns its keep in this system. Satan promises unmasking. The reader enters expecting to discover what decent society supposedly hides. There's a kind of sleepy comedy in that promise when one is sitting among catalog cards and soft lamps. The devil in this case arrives stapled. Yet the effect was not small. Once printed, the tale could be cited by later writers who preferred a source, any source, to no source at all. This is another old habit of bad history. Put a story in print, then point to the print as proof the story was already true. The pamphlet becomes both accusation and evidence. It is a tidy arrangement, rather like borrowing your own witness. When later generations repeated the Waterloo legend, they often borrowed its central picture from this 1846 text or from its descendants. The line runs outward from here. That is why this dry little item matters so much. It is not the battle, it is not the trade. It is the mold for the memory. You touch the page edge and feel how thin it is. Whole reputations can be wrapped in paper lighter than a napkin. Outside this room, in imagination, Regency London still mutters on. The Royal Exchange hums. Bond certificates crinkle between gloved hands. Rumor moves like low weather under the dome. The column leans and says nothing, which remains excellent practice for becoming legend. Henri arrives damp with another packet and still has not slept since 1812. And far away, years later, a French pamphleteer with theatrical taste gives the rumor its durable costume. He signs it Satan, for reasons known perhaps only to Satan. So when people ask where the Waterloo story really comes from, the answer is less romantic than they expect. It comes from paper, timing, and appetite. It comes from political irritation in 1846. It comes from a writer who understood resentment. It comes from old prejudice fitted neatly into a market anecdote. Most of all, it comes from the pleasure of a simple secret. One man knows, one room panics, one family wins. History is rarely that tidy, which is one reason the tale slept so well in public memory. It offered a shape smoother than reality. In the warm reading room, you can almost forgive the past for loving such stories. They fit so nicely in the hand. But the pages keep their little clues. The late date, the loud tone, the pen name dressed for melodrama, the architecture of suspicion beneath the prose. Taken together, they whisper the plain answer at last. The famous Waterloo coup was not inherited fact. It was manufactured legend. And like many manufactured things, it was made carefully, cheaply, and for a market already waiting. The paper gives a dry sigh when you turn it over in the warm reading room. Candle wax, dust, and old paste sit in the air together. The room feels padded by wool coats, soft fire heat, and patient lamps. On the table lie thin newspaper slips, folded letters, and one auction catalog with a T-ring on it. Their edges are rough on your fingers. Their ink has browned into the shade of weak coffee. You are meant to be hunting one grand story. Instead, the first thing you find is a scatter of smaller mutters. Before 1846 gave the tale its famous costume, the idea already moved in little pieces. It drifted through coffee houses, private letters, stock market chatter, and those printed squibs that thrive on raised eyebrows. Nothing is complete yet. Nothing arrives with trumpets. It is more like hearing a tune from the next room. In 1815 London, people already thought Nathan Rothschild had quicker news than almost anyone alive. That part was not fantasy. It was a practical marvel built from horses, boats, clerks, sealed notes, and men with cold boots. Henri the courier appears here in spirit, dripping over a map of Europe again. One suspects he had not slept since 1812, and no one had the heart to tell him. In those first scraps, the emphasis falls on speed. A messenger comes early. A letter arrives first. A man at the exchange knows something before the ministers seem ready to say it aloud. That alone was enough to start the kettle humming. The Royal Exchange was a place where posture became evidence very quickly. You could hold a glove too tightly, and 3 brokers would attach a theory to it before luncheon. Nathan stood at his usual marble place, which later memory turned into destiny itself. In the room, he was simply another habit. He was there each morning, stocky and quiet, as reliable as stone. That is why they called him the column in more ways than one. He leaned on a column, yes, but he also seemed load-bearing for half of European finance. The early gossip did not always accuse him of a theatrical trick. Often it only circled around his unreadable face. He knew first. He knew more. He bought or sold for reasons ordinary people could not guess. In the smoky coffee houses nearby, the tables were sticky with spilled punch and damp from fogged coats. Spoons clinked in cups. Newspapers lay open flat beneath elbows. Someone always read the shipping news out loud. A bond certificate could pass from one gloved hand to another with a polite nod. Then, a rumor would follow behind it, much faster than the paper itself. Some fragments hint that he profited from early knowledge of the battle's result. Some merely suggest he had superior intelligence and acted before others could. A few accuse him of moving prices by presence alone, which is rather a lot to ask of one man's eyebrows. Mr. Higginbotham, who exists wherever markets produce oxygen, would have loved these half-statements. The moment a rumor reached a third person, it was generally his work. One hostile comment in print might speak darkly of foreign bankers and private news. Another might mutter about stock jobbing, messengers, and suspiciously neat timing. None of them yet builds the tidy machine later retellings prefer. That neat machine takes time to assemble. You can feel the gap between event and legend in the papers themselves. Dates are smudged. A writer says he was told by a gentleman who heard it in the city. Another offers confidence without furniture. There is no room, no hour, no clerk, no receipt. There is only a tone of knowingness, which is often the cheapest item in any archive. The real and ordinary parts are plain enough. The Rothschild network did move news with startling speed. It was essentially 19th century DHL, if DHL had a pigeon division and served one very well-dressed client. That speed impressed admirers and irritated rivals. It also begged for a story large enough to explain it. When governments were slow, private intelligence looked almost magical. Yet the mechanics were stubbornly unmagical. Someone saddled a horse, someone paid a boatman, someone copied a letter twice because rain had reached the first copy. That kind of labor rarely survives in myth. People prefer a single genius beside a marble column, not a chain of tired men misplacing hats. So the early seeds lie there in the documents. Quick news, market skill, suspicion, admiration with a squint, a sense that Nathan had seen around a corner before others even reached it. From these ingredients, later writers could make almost any stew they pleased. The reading room grows quieter as you compare one version against another. Firelight picks out the cloth on the table. Outside, a cart rolls by with a patient wooden rattle. The striking thing is not that the stories differ. The striking thing is how cheerfully everyone ignored the differences once the tale became famous. In one telling, Nathan receives certain news while London still trembles in doubt. In another, he receives only a hint and gambles on the rest. In a third, he stages a dramatic sale. In a fourth, he merely lets others misread his silence. Some place the scene before the official government courier appears. Some require the market to stay open just long enough for a grand maneuver. Others glide past the awkward fact that clocks and settlement practices can be annoyingly solid. There are versions where he sells heavily, causing panic. There are versions where he buys steadily through agents while pretending gloom. There are even versions where his expression alone sends consoles drifting downward like obedient geese. A good many geese were asked to do a good many things. When you lay the accounts side by side, they make poor companions. One says he stood visibly desolate at the column. Another says he acted in secret. He cannot be both a public performance and an invisible whisper at the same moment. One version needs the market to collapse first, another needs only a modest dip, yet another quietly forgets the actual movement of government bonds, which is a rude omission in a story about government bonds. The prices printed in newspapers do not care about drama. They sit there in narrow columns, plain as porridge, asking only to be read correctly. This is perhaps why they were not invited to many retellings. Contradictions grow especially friendly after they have passed through memory for 30 years. By then, people remember the outline they enjoy. The joints no longer matter. A listener keeps the useful parts. Nathan is swift, the state is slow, the crowd is fooled, riches change hands. The scene fits inside one morning and leaves no dust behind. It is, in other words, a story made to travel. Then comes 1846, when Georges Mathieu d'Erneville prints a pamphlet under the name Satan. This choice still raises gentle questions about editorial judgment. What had been loose and suggestive became sharp and portable. The tale acquired a villain's cape, a clearer sequence, and the satisfying click of a plotted trick. In that printed form, Nathan learns Waterloo's result first. He appears crushed. He sells or seems to sell. Others panic. Prices fall. His agents buy the market at a discount. Then the truth arrives, and he becomes vastly richer. It is almost too neat. That is one reason people loved it. Pamphlets of that age were often cheap, fast, and sticky with prejudice. They were sold folded, passed around, quoted badly, and believed selectively. A good slander could travel farther than a good correction before the printer had swept the floor. Satan's version did not invent every ingredient. It arranged the tray. It gave the dish a name and a smell. The coffee houses of London had long trained men to enjoy this kind of thing. Ink on fingers, snuff in waistcoat creases, chairs scraping. One man swearing he heard it from the brother-in-law of a clerk who saw the original note. Once Satan supplied the full dramatic script, older fragments snapped into line behind it. Vague comments about quick intelligence now looked like foreshadowing. Casual dislike hardened into evidence. Even silence at the column became suspicious choreography. Nathan at his marble spot was suddenly the original posting to FinTech Twitter. He said nothing at all, and everyone screenshotted him in their minds. Of course, the contradictions remained inside the new version, like pins under a cushion. You could still feel them if you pressed. Most people preferred not to press. If one account said he spread false news, another said he spread no news. If one needed a crash, another needed only confusion. The pamphlet's real success was emotional tidiness, not factual tidiness, and tidiness is a soothing thing. Even now, when you know better, you can feel its pull. The archive asks you to sit with untidy matter instead. Bills, ledgers, courier notes, a letter with half a seal, price lists in cramped type. The romance leaks away, but the furniture comes back. The room brightens a little when a page is lifted near the lamp. You can see laid paper lines like faint watermarks in skin. Someone in 1815 sharpened a penknife here, and the scratch remains. By the late Victorian age, the tale had picked up another coat of polish. John Reeves, writing in 1887, did not leave it in its plain pamphlet form. Victorian biographers were fond of scenes you could almost stage. They liked a clock on the wall, a watchful crowd, and one decisive gesture. Reeves gave the Waterloo legend more of those comforts. He wrote long after the event, when anecdote had had decades to rise. By then the story had been told at club tables, dinner parties, and over after-supper port until it gleamed like overhandled silver. Reeves took the already famous outline and furnished the room. He strengthened the image of Nathan at the exchange. He leaned harder on the market's terror. He gave greater precision to motives, glances, and hidden orders. The scene becomes almost theatrical. The column stands fixed and grave. Brokers glance his way. A trusted agent slips through the crowd. Consoles sink. Fortunes roll like marbles across the floor. The details sound concrete because they are decorative. That is not quite the same thing. A real market morning contains so many small interruptions. Ink dries slowly. A clerk mishears a number. A messenger cannot find the right doorway. Someone stops for broth, because men do in fact need broth. Legend edits all that out. Reeves helped with the editing. You can sense the Victorian appetite for strong character sketches in his telling. Nathan becomes more enigmatic. The bystanders become more credulous. Chance and ordinary muddle politely step aside so genius can walk through. This was also a century very fond of great men and grand turns. If a fortune existed, many readers wanted one superb stroke to explain it. 30 years of patient arbitrage is less suitable for the fireside. Reeves seems to have understood that instinct perfectly. He was not the first to repeat the Waterloo story. He was one of the voices that made it feel settled. After enough confident repetition, a rumor begins to borrow the manners of fact. His book also arrived in an age that loved anecdotal biography. Readers expected private scenes they could picture. A bare correction such as, "the prices do not match," had little chance against a vivid morning on the exchange floor. Marble beats mathematics in most parlors. So Reeves added what legends always crave. He gave the tale shape, pace, and upholstery. When later writers looked back, they found his version ready-made on the shelf. The old ingredients remained visible beneath the varnish. Quick news, the government's delay, the crowd's fear, Nathan's reserve. Yet each retelling laid another smooth coat over the cracks. What is missing, as ever, is the stubborn trail from claim to proof. Who saw what? Which letter said it? Which trade settled when? On such dull pegs, great fables dislike hanging. Meanwhile, the reading room offers its own small comforts. The librarian slides over another box. The string around it is soft from use. A penciled shelf mark sits on the lid like a secret with no drama at all. Inside are the things legends hate most. Lists. There are account books that smell faintly of leather and starch. There are notes with sums entered twice. There are dates pinned to papers by clerks who never dreamed they were spoiling a future myth. Long before Niall Ferguson arrived in the family archive, careful scholars had already started tugging at the Waterloo story's hem. Economic historians checked the bond prices. Market historians looked at the timing. Patient biographers compared the published tale against surviving records. This work did not travel as well as the legend. It contained too many tables and not enough marble. Still, the foundations were laid. Researchers noticed that the market movements required by the dramatic story did not fit the printed price data very well. They noticed that several famous details appear late, not early. They noticed that certainty kept arriving decades after the event. That is a suspicious sort of certainty. Ferguson, then, had a further advantage. He worked through the Rothschild papers themselves, with all the ledgers, letters, and private business records that rumor had never bothered to consult. The debunking that emerged was not a single flourish. It was a slow walk through paper. He showed that Nathan did indeed have fast intelligence. That much remained true, and it is part of the legend's staying power. A story with one solid brick can gild a surprising number of extra floors. But the famous coup did not survive archival-like very comfortably. The records did not show a grand false sale, followed by secret empire making purchases at a panic low. They showed something more ordinary, and therefore more persuasive. Nathan had been active in government securities in ways that reflected broad strategy, existing commitments, and the normal business of a major financier. The gains were real enough, but not the melodrama of a ruined crowd and one triumphant mastermind. In some reconstructions, he even bought after prices had already moved upward on improving news. That is less romantic, but markets often are. The family correspondence also made the courier story more precise. Messages moved quickly, yes. They did not move by sorcery. They moved by planning, money, and a continent-wide tolerance for exhausted horses. Henri, bless him, turns out to have been heroic but not supernatural. Ferguson's work mattered because it gathered many strands at once. Price data, settlement practice, courier timing, private letters, and account books all leaned in the same direction. The old tale grew less sturdy each time a real document was set beside it. Other scholars then built further on this. They examined how anti-banker literature recycled old motifs. They traced the legend's path through biographies, pamphlets, and popular histories. They showed how often writers copied one another without checking the original floorboards. The floorboards were not glamorous. They were, however, real. In the reading room, that reality has a homely look. Brown tape on an old spine, faint red ruling in a ledger, a clerk's careful hand making a neat line under a sum before going home to supper. Debunking rarely comes as a thunderbolt. It usually arrives like this, with a patient accumulation of boring competence. You can almost see why it struggled in the wild. A dramatic myth offers one bright morning, one clever man, one fooled crowd, and one enormous payoff. A historian offers several decades of document habits, communications lag, market mechanics, and a note that one famous source was literally signed Satan. The myth wins many dinner parties before dessert. There is also a simple comfort in stories where hidden power becomes visible for a minute. Finance is slippery. Credit, bills, exchange rates, and sovereign debt feel abstract, even when they run the world in stout boots. Waterloo in this legend solves that problem with scenery. It gives invisible money a body at the column. It lets people point to one man and say, "There it is." That is a very soothing arrangement for the mind. The past itself was less tidy. Wealth came from networks, marriages, trust, clerks, codes, timing, information, reputation, and an almost devotional relationship with paper. That is harder to fit into one anecdote told over pudding. A good myth also flatters the teller. To repeat it is to sound initiated. One knows the secret behind public events. One is not taken in by official versions. Mr. Higginbotham would have preened magnificently. The truth, by contrast, often sounds disappointingly procedural. You must explain bond prices, dispatch routes, settlement delays, and why rumors can form before facts have even put their gloves on. There is another quiet reason the story endured. Nathan Rothschild already looked, to many contemporaries, like the kind of man who ought to have a legend attached to him. He was rich, foreign-born, private, and astonishingly competent. People have always placed extra furniture around such figures. Older suspicions did the rest. Secretive bankers, hidden messages, private advantage, and a city crowd made foolish, all fit familiar patterns. Once these patterns were in place, evidence had to push uphill. Evidence does not enjoy hills. And then there is form. The legend is visual. You can see the marble column. You can hear the murmur of the brokers. You can feel the crinkle of bond certificates passing between gloved fingers, while one silent man gives nothing away. The correction is not visual in the same way. It lives in ledgers and price lists. It lives in the fact that one trade settled here and another there. It lives in letters whose chief excitement is that they arrive on time. Sleepy listeners, and many lively ones, do not always choose the ledger. The tale also survives because each age remakes it in its own image. In one period it becomes a warning about speculation. In another it becomes a parable about information. In another it turns into a conspiracy with modern lighting and worse typography. The bones stay the same. Public panic. Private gain. Everyone understands the sequence in a breath. Even debunkers help keep it alive a little. To deny a famous story, one must repeat it first. The old shape gets refreshed. Another generation hears the outline and remembers that part best. The correction trails after like a sensible coat nobody puts on. So you sit in the warm room and watch the layers settle into place. Early gossip supplied the mood. Satan supplied the viral script. Reeves supplied Victorian upholstery. Later scholars supplied the broom and dustpan. The floor, however, still glitters with scraps. A myth like this persists, not because documents fail to exist. It persists because documents ask more of the listener than a scene does. They ask patience, and stories ask only attention. Attention is easier to come by. When evidence meets appetite, appetite often eats first. It likes patterns. It likes faces. It likes a quiet genius at a column while the state blunders several hours behind. That last part, at least, had enough truth in it to keep the tale warm for generations. The Rothschild courier network really was faster than many official channels. Once people grant that, the next step can feel almost natural, even when it is wrong. A small truth is excellent yeast. You close one folder and open another. The paper whispers again. Somewhere in the building a clock gives a modest click, as if even time here prefers not to interrupt. On the page is no grand confession. There is only business, a note of receipt, a purchase entered plainly, a hand that cared more for accuracy than legend, and that in the end is the quiet answer to Waterloo's great money myth. The rumor came from many mouths, then found a gifted printer, then found eager biographers, then found generations who liked its shake too much to surrender it. The truth remained where truth often does, in dull rooms, in boxes, in the calm company of ink. It is nice at the end to let 3 small pictures come back and rest on the table. The first is that marble column at the Royal Exchange. Nathan Mayer Rothschild is there again, as he always is. He stands in the same place with the same heavy calm. The low thunder of brokers rolls around him like weather in a high room. Candle wax hangs in the air with printer's ink. Government bond certificates crinkle softly between gloved hands. Mr. Higginbotham is already 3 rumors ahead of himself. He has heard something from someone who heard something from someone else. By that stage, everyone quietly assumes Mr. Higginbotham was involved from the start, yet the column gives them almost nothing. He does not perform panic. He does not announce triumph. He does not throw himself across the floor in a storm of dramatic gestures. He simply remains there, stout and unreadable, like a man who has understood that stillness can be louder than speech. It is a lovely image, because the legend wants theater, and the real scene offers posture, patience, and expensive cloth. It is the original kind of cryptic market posting. It is what fintech Twitter would have looked like if everyone wore boots and smelled faintly of wet wool. The second picture is Henry the courier. He is damp again. He is always damp. The channel seems to have adopted him personally. He arrives before official messengers with another packet tucked inside his coat. He looks like 19th century DHL after 3 missed meals and very few life choices. His speed is real, which is important. His speed is not magic, which is also important. He matters because fast news mattered. It does not matter because he delivered a secret signal for one perfect act of market sorcery. He mattered because the whole Rothschild machine was built to make distance less troublesome. A letter left one city and reached another before most people had finished enlarging the rumor. That is impressive enough without adding a trumpet. The third picture is quieter still. It is the warm reading room at the end of the search. Papers are spread under a mild pool of lamplight. The edges of old bond sheets curl a little. The handwriting grows easier to read as the night grows later. And there, like a cat that wandered in from a less reputable alley, sits the pamphlet of 1846 by Georges Mathieu d'Ernevaux, who chose to publish as Satan. This remains a choice that raises several questions about editorial judgment. It also tells you a great deal about the later life of the story. The famous Waterloo tale survives because it is neat. It is fast. It has a villain, a room full of fools, a sudden crash, and a secret winner. It is the kind of thing people repeat without opening a ledger. In modern terms, it is a viral thread written by an anonymous account named Satan, and people shared it anyway. Once you return to the records, the shape of things grows both less cinematic and more interesting. Nathan did profit handsomely from the years around Waterloo. The papers do not deny that. They simply deny the nice, clean drama. They do not show a single dazzling morning when he feigned despair, caused a collapse, and scooped up England at a discount before lunch. They show work. They show organization. They show subsidy payments moved across borders. They show exchange deals arranged with care. They show bullion handled, insured, forwarded, and accounted for. They show government loans managed with the kind of patience that never becomes folklore because it looks too much like paperwork. They show bonds bought not in one theatrical gulp, but in a quieter pattern of judgment, confidence, and timing. He understood government credit better than most men around him. He understood that if Britain emerged solid and borrowable, good paper bought at the right moments would do very well. He also understood that states with reliable credit become repeat customers, which is much nicer for business than a single afternoon of panic. So the real strategy was patient accumulation. It was careful management of loans. It was a habit of backing credit that could be made steadier, broader, and more trusted. The money from that was large and perfectly real, but it was not the storybook mountain of gold that later pamphlets like to wheel on stage. No tidy number sits in the archive waiting to flatter the myth. Archives are rude that way. Still, the gains were substantial. They ran to very large sums in commissions, margins, and bond positions. They reached many tens of thousands of pounds in the Waterloo-era business itself. Then they grew much larger as peace opened a long season of government borrowing and refinancing. That is the part people often skip, because it sounds less thrilling than a floor trick. Yet it is the heart of the matter. Nathan's real genius was not a magic wink at the exchange. It was the construction of trust at scale. It was knowing where money was needed, where credit was strongest, where it was weaker, and how to bridge the gap before the British state had finished clearing its throat. He made money from being useful. He made more money from being useful again. There is something almost soothing in that. It is business as repetition rather than revelation. It is less lightning strike, more stove that never quite goes out. And then there is the quiet irony that lingers after the papers settle. The family that became famous in these stories usually prospered by backing stability. They did well when loans were placed, paid, and believed in. They did well when governments looked safer tomorrow than they did today. They were not feeding on chaos like storm crows in a penny novel. They were helping build markets that could keep standing. Yet the myth turned them into chaos merchants all the same. That happens because a story about secret panic is easier to carry than a story about discount rates, creditworthiness, and patient bond accumulation. One fits on a napkin in a coffee house, the other needs a filing cabinet. Mr. Higginbotham will always choose the napkin, so will most of the world. That is why the Waterloo legend kept going. It was too useful as a pattern. Once invented, it became the skeleton key for later conspiracy theories. Each new age picked it up, dusted it off, and used it again. The names changed, the media changed. The old coffeehouse murmur became print, then pamphlet, then whispers, then radio, then message boards, then the glowing little rectangles of our own day. But the bones stayed much the same. A hidden financier, a rigged market, a baffled crowd, a wicked secret. It is all very convenient. The trouble is that the true version is stranger in a slower way. It asks us to look at systems instead of tricks. It asks us to notice couriers, exchange rates, commissions, trust, government debt, family networks, and the very unglamorous power of being faster, steadier, and better organized than almost everyone else in the room. It asks us to accept that a fortune can be made not by pulling off one perfect deception, but by understanding how states borrow and how paper moves. That is harder to repeat after breakfast. It is also much closer to what the documents actually show. So the fondest thing to carry away tonight may be that odd little reversal. The legend gave Nathan a sharper drama than he needed. The archive gave him a slower one. In the archive, the column remains at his post. Henry keeps arriving impossibly early. Mr. Higginbotham keeps helping the rumor along with civic dedication. Satan keeps hovering at the edge of the shelf with his unfortunate byline. And through all of it, the crinkle of certificates continues under warm lamplight, reminding anyone patient enough to listen that the past is often less explosive than advertised and much more detailed. Now the room has gone soft around the edges, and the old paper seems to hold its own small warmth in the lamplight. The story settles not like a sudden answer, but like a blanket of quiet weight, with the murmur of London far away and the bond sheets finally lying still. Henry the courier, for once, has no packet left under his arm, and even he can sleep before dawn. May your dreams be free of pamphlets signed by Satan. May your dreams be free of government bond markets that crash between Tuesday and Thursday. May your dreams be free of carrier pigeons delivering reports that are only partially accurate. Thank you for listening. Keep your thoughts easy, and good night.